Hey friends, how you guys doing today? It's raining outside, which is good. We need the groundwater. It's pretty dry out. Birds are chirping. Spring's here. All my neighbors are seeding, so it's good that they get some rain on top of those fresh seeds that they put into the ground. Super important. They need rain to get everything to sprout, and then it's okay if it's a little drier, and then when everything's flowering, it needs rain again. So we're off to a decent start. Them farmers need rain. Anyhow, I wanted to do a little quick recap of the 66cc cutoff. I wanted to talk to you guys about a few things. You guys were overwhelmingly interested in that video. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it, so we're probably going to do more videos like that in the future. You guys had a lot of questions about each saw and etc, etc, etc. So I thought, let's do a quick recap of each saw in that video, and let's talk about them. Okay, the first one in the video was the Echo 670. Again, you guys saw me build this on video. This saw is not crazy turned up. It's a good, reliable work saw. That's what I built it for. I didn't expect this to be the fastest in the cutoff. And again, friends, the reason why I preach use a timing wheel, use a timing wheel, use a timing wheel is because I knew which saw would be the fastest based on the timing numbers and the bore and stroke. Okay? It wasn't a guessing game. I was shocked if any of them outcut anything else. You get what I'm saying? I knew that this would be somewhere at the bottom. Not that this is a slow saw. It's just that in wood that size, for saws this size, you really got to make horsepower to win a shootout. Okay, so that's why it's important to use a timing wheel, because if you can't track where your numbers were at, you really have no way of recreating your results or applying it to the next saw. Guessing port heights, some guys do it and that works for them, but for me, I want to be bang on. If I build a saw for somebody, if somebody else comes up to me and says, hey, I want you to do my Echo, and they want it like this, I can make it exactly like this. That's the key. Okay, so this is the first saw in the cutoff, and as you guys saw in the video, it's pretty zippy. Here's a clip of it cutting in that wood. You see we're hitting some knots. Now, friends, I did 2 cuts with each saw, and I took the fastest cut. Okay, so 21 seconds was this saw's first cut, and that was the fastest cut it did of the day. So here's the cut, and we'll jump back in. Okay, you can see this thing's fast. Like, it's zippy. I built this thing for quick throttle, good cut speed, and reasonable torque. I didn't build it for horsepower. I didn't build it for torque. It's right in the middle. I want it to be an all-purpose saw. A torque saw generally is slow in smaller wood, and a horsepower saw might not pull a long chain. That's just the way 2-strokes are. If you can get both, even better. You guys see, when it hits the knots, it's slowing down. Again, because it's not a torque saw, when it hits the knots, it's going to slow down a little bit. But all in all, this thing, it's a good saw. What sense is a saw that's turned right up that doesn't idle and tune properly? This saw idles and tunes and starts beautifully. I'm super happy. Again, 34 millimeter stroke, 50 millimeter bore, okay? The 630 and the 266 are short stroke saws. That does matter. When you're porting, a longer stroke saw will typically make more power. You have to be careful turning them up more though. And again, that you got to use a little intuition and look at the stroke and the design of the interior of the saw and the piston dwell, how long it stays at the top and the bottom. You have to take all that into account when you're picking your numbers, because a long stroke saw isn't going to like changing directions as quickly as a short stroke saw. You guys get what I'm saying? So you have to take that into account. You're never going to make the kind of torque with a short stroke saw as you are with a long stroke saw. Okay, so 670, again, 21 seconds. That was the fastest cut of the day. I was pretty happy with that. I'm just going to walk over and grab the next saw. Okay, 266, 34 mil stroke, 50 millimeter bore, exactly like that Echo. What are the differences? This saw has more time on it, it's more broken in. That might be a factor in where the Echo placed. I still think it would be right around where this thing cut. This did a 20-second cut. And again, let's have a look. Its fastest cut of the day was this one. Now, can you guys hear the difference? This thing seems to pull a little harder in the cut, and it's a little bit faster. Limbing, I think the 670 pulls more RPM. This seems to have a little more torque. What is the difference? This has a small carb for this series of saws. It's a 163A Tillotson. 163, 162. That is the smallest carb in this series of saw. I find when you have a smaller carb on a saw like this of the series, you know, when you build a certain amount of 266s, you can kind of track them. The larger carb saws ported tend to make more power. So that's what's holding this saw back. It doesn't matter to me. It's a good saw. It starts and runs good, and it pulls hard. So I think that is the difference. This saw gets more fuel than the carb on that Echo. That Echo is a really small carb for a 66cc saw. And I mentioned to Son of Liberty, when he gets that saw, he might want to try a bigger carb on it. And I gave him some ideas of what I think would fit. It might actually take, you know, it might make another half a horsepower or something if you put a bigger carb on that. So this was 1 second faster. This consistently was a second or two faster than that saw was, the 670. So we can say for sure that this is a stronger saw. It could just be the difference between the two saws. This muffler is wide open. It's got 3 fish gills and the pinholes that somebody smashed in there. Again, go back in the channel in the 200 series playlist. This saw is in there. This saw has a lot of time on it. This is one of the first saws I ported with a timing wheel on this channel. And as you guys can see, you can get results right away. Okay, I'm going to grab the next saw. .630 Johnsered. Now, factory, this saw is 34 millimeter stroke, 48 millimeter bore. Same size bore as the 365, but a shorter stroke, making it about 61 cc's. Now, these stock, these 630 Supers, are very, very strong 60cc saws. Every time I've run one of these stock, even when this thing was stock, I've always been very impressed with the performance for what it is. But again, in a chassis this weight, these don't weigh much, but why not pack the biggest punch you can? So people were asking me, what's the difference between the 266 and this saw? This has the same cylinder. It's an early 1980s 266 top end on this saw. Okay. I cut a pop-up and did machine work. So this saw has higher compression than that saw. Okay, probably about 20 pounds. This saw has a higher exhaust roof than that saw. It also has a bigger carb. Let's watch it cut. This was the second fastest saw of the day. I was pretty sure that that's the way it was going to turn out. This saw is really stout for what it is. Let's have a look, see it cut. 18 seconds, I believe. Okay, so there you go. You can hear this thing. It's pulling high RPM and it's got pull. It's got grunt in the cut. It pulls chain harder. Running the two, you can feel that this is just a hotter saw out of the box. This thing was a little funny tuning that day. The high end was tuning fine. The low jet was a little finicky. Who knows why? It seemed to clean up by the end of the day, but this saw has a stock muffler with a big hole in it, and it seems to work. I've considered poking a second hole in this muffler, but honestly, the way that this thing, it's kind of dented here, it moves a lot of air. So if something works, I usually just leave it, because it's like you can spend all this time porting a muffler and make the saw run worse. So this has hotter timing numbers, more intake, more exhaust timing, a bigger carburetor. This has a 225B Tillotson. Again, if I fudge some numbers, it is what it is. This has a big carb, the same big carb that's on the newer 266s, the 268. Some 272s will have this carb. It's a bigger carb. This saw gets more fuel, and you can feel it. It lights up right now, and it pulls harder, okay? But this saw is all 630 from the intake back, okay? The only thing that's 266 on this saw is the piston and the cylinder. Everything else is 630 on it. So, again, I knew that this would probably be, and I always say probably because you never know, depending on the wood and the chain. I sharpened that chain to be a good balance. That chain was a little bit hungry, but I wanted that on purpose because I wanted the saws all to have to work in that cut. Okay, so this was the second fastest saw, and again, the timing numbers would tell you that right away. I'm going to grab the next saw. Okay, some of you caught it. I made a little oopsie in that video. Sachs-Dolmar 120 Super. This saw is actually 68 cc's, so it's almost a 70 cc class saw. You guys were asking about the exhaust. I opened this exhaust up and I cut all the piping out of it. It's just a straight pipe coming right out of the muffler. It might need a little more. I might actually weld a second tube in the side here. I ported this saw early on in my timing wheel career, if we want to call it, and I never ran it. The gas cap broke, and Bill Block from Australia actually sent us a gas cap for this saw. This saw is 36 millimeter stroke, 49 millimeter bore. If it was 50 millimeter bore, it'd be 71 cc's, but because it's 49, which is kind of an oddball size, it's 68 cc. So I got a little confused in the bore and stroke. Let's watch this thing cut. You can hear it. It's just a freight train. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't stumble over the knots. This is a saw that's easier for the average person to run, because if you lean on it, which I don't lean on saws, but if you did lean on it, it doesn't really slow down. It just cuts. But again, watch it cut, and then let's review it. You can hear it. I made 2 cuts with it. It's just wah, right through. I found an old notebook for this saw. I didn't go too radical on this saw. Most of the work is transfers and intake timing. I raised the exhaust just a little bit with this saw, and it's strong. I think we can do better in the future, friends. I think I'm going to rip this apart and go warmer on it. I know more now than I did then when I ported this saw. By rights, this saw should have won the shootout, and it was close. It felt the second strongest, but it was the third fastest in the cut. 20 seconds was the cut, so it outcut the two short stroke saws. The 630 though, the 630, because it's turned up so warm, again, this thing wasn't its match. In the cut, this felt stronger than the 630, but after two cuts of each, the timing, it proved. So again, by the timing numbers, because I didn't turn this up so warm, it should have finished mid-pack, and it did. So this saw, out of all of them, would probably pull the longest bar and the biggest wood. It's the biggest saw, and it's not screaming, so I still maintained a lot of torque. Interesting, isn't it? I'm going to grab the last saw in the cut. And it's funny, I pulled this saw out. I was talking to a buddy about doing a 365 build for his son, and I was looking at it. It's like, yeah, I sure like this saw. This is the first saw ever on this channel, friends. It was stock then, had a base gasket. I ran it for a season, and then I started porting, and it was like, when the Iron Horse started doing porting, he did something that nobody had ever done, friends. He was actually showing what he was doing on video. The whole thing, what he's doing to the transfers. I built this saw, friends, by copying Harvey's videos. I didn't know him then. I studied what he did, and I went to porting. And I got some help from Kenzie at Bayou Country Power Saws. And he gave me some tips for the timing numbers, and I set out to port this. After I was done with it, it was kind of like that Sachs-Dolmar. It wasn't crazy enough. So I opened this thing up 2 more times. And, oh, we got some oil on it here. I opened this thing up 2 more times and got it to where it is now. This thing is ragged edge of sanity. The numbers are very, very stout in this saw. If you're going to try and recreate these, approach your timing numbers carefully and really work your way up to it. This thing's just there where if I went farther, it probably wouldn't pull hard anymore. But as you guys can see, this thing easily outcut every other saw. Watch the video of it, and I'll hit you guys back. Again, 16 seconds. The next closest saw was 18. That 630 Super has a pop-up, cylinder machining, and like ragged edge of sanity timing numbers. It couldn't match this. Why? The stroke. This saw, even though it's the smallest saw in the series, okay, this saw has the longest stroke. The same stroke as the Dolmar. The reason why the Dolmar is so strong is that long stroke. And it goes to show, just because you have the smallest saw, a couple of cc's do make a difference in the cut. Otherwise, an XPW 372 wouldn't be stronger than a standard 372. Why is it stronger? It's got, 4 cc's stock. Well, that's the difference, and you can feel it in the cut. Again, this saw, the timing numbers are stout on it, and I would approach them carefully, but I've been I've been running this saw for what, a couple years. I have cut stacks and stacks and stacks of wood with this saw. I've done falling, I've done noodling, bucking, you name it. Okay, I've noodled cord after cord after cord of oak that wouldn't split with this saw, and with this bar on it, or with a long bar, and it's like, it's fine. You look inside this cylinder, it looks brand new. So it goes to show, if you feed them enough fuel, keep them cool with the muffler mod, and pick your numbers right, you can get a wicked saw that's not a huge saw. And it goes to show. So again, friends, use a timing wheel. If you port without a timing wheel, if you get success, you're not going to be able to recreate it. Because, I mean, you might, but you can measure your port heights. But here's the problem. What if your deck height on your cases are lower or taller? It happens all the time. It's going to be really hard to recreate that unless you've done, you know, and say you port 372s and you've done hundreds of them, you could probably track the deck height based on the serial number. But when they change tooling, the deck height's going to change. That's doable, but for the average guy like me, you might port a couple saws here and there of one kind. It's going to be really hard to track your timing numbers. So again, once you have timing numbers, your deck height is irrelevant. And if you have a lathe, your squish is irrelevant because you can always change it, right? You can always deck your cylinder to get your squish where you want, and then adjust your ports to where you like to run them. Every saw builder has different timing numbers that they like for each saw and for a group of saws. What you like is going to be up to you. I was talking to a buddy the other day, and he mentioned when he's chunking out, when he's chunking out trees, when he's climbing, sometimes he likes a little slower, torquier saw, because sometimes he's just blipping that throttle just to get that little cut, that little more on the hinge to get it moving, or he's wedging it over and he wants to steer it one way or the other by where he cuts his hinge. And I was saying to him, I said, you know what, you might not like one of my saws. These things light up really fast, and they're just, that's the way I like them. I like my saws to be ragged edge of sanity, and I like them to cut, fast. Some people like a torquier saw. And again, that's up to you, friends. The only way you're going to know what you like is to experiment and to try different things. That's why, for me, when I started porting all the time, it was important to me to keep my saws and not port for other people, because now we're getting on, a couple years of porting. I have most of the saws I've done, and I can pull them out and revisit my own work at any time and say, how good was that saw that I did? Again, first saw I ported with a timing wheel, and here it is, and I'm still as impressed with this saw today as I was, when I first did it. So that just goes to show, it's nice to be able to check out your own work from time to time, to know if your saw was as good as you thought it was. And then when you really get a knack for it, sky's the limit on what you can do, and it's just a lot of fun, and you start thinking out of the box, and it's fun, friends. Anyhow, I won't ramble on anymore. So that's the deal. I made 2 cuts with each saw, same bar and chain. So what? We made 10 cuts total with this chain, very sharp. But again, this chain was sharp because the last saw in the cut the fastest. So, goes to show you. Anyhow, friends, as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate the support, the help, the comments. Just thank you to everybody that takes their time to hang out on this fellow's channel. I appreciate it. As always, thanks for watching. Take her easy.